This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello and welcome back once again to North Pod. It is round 20 and just like most times we play Geelong, we are going to be talking about a loss against Geelong. Better than earlier in the year, so that is a positive. But still a disappointing way to lose the game. Been a long time since we've beaten Geelong, unfortunately. And some of you listeners who have been around for a while might remember my friend Glenn, who I had on last year, has certainly had the wood over me for several years now. Hopefully, we're at a point where we might actually be able to compete with Geelong in the next couple of years, but unfortunately that wasn't this week. We got out to a fantastic start, kicked the first couple of goals, and then hung around for a little while. The third quarter was a real roller coaster. Early on, it looked like Geelong was, just one goal away from putting us out of it, and then we got a bit of momentum. We kicked 3 goals, and we got the game back to within 10 points, and it looked like we were going to go into three-quarter time well in the game. Yeah, it was exciting. It looked like, we'd sort of steadied the flow and stemmed the flow, maybe even. It looked like we'd kind of had a maturation of sorts. It looked like we were going to be able to, maybe not go on and win, but at least give ourselves a chance. And then, our late quarter curse continued. We have watched this movie before. We conceded 3 late goals at the end of the third quarter. And it was game over from that point, unfortunately. Went into three-quarter time, 28 or so points down, and we just weren't going to come back from that point. Stengle kicked 2 fantastic small forward goals, one from a stoppage where he just, hit the right spot at the right time and crumbed a great goal, and another where he snapped it from a seemingly impossible angle. And then Patrick Dangerfield took a contested mark sort of on the siren and went back and kicked one after the siren. And that was 15 seconds or so from the throw up or the ball up in the middle to getting it to Dangerfield's mark inside 50. So that was an absolute killer. You could almost accept the 2 from Stengle. I wouldn't say I do, but you could kind of accept that, and then Dangerfield kicks a third and just really put the dagger into our hearts, unfortunately. So from then on it was always going to be game over in that last quarter, and unfortunately another loss for us. So let's jump into reviewing the game. Team selection, we had 3 changes coming out of our relatively competitive loss to Carlton last week. All of them forced, so McKercher, Fisher and Ford were out injured. None of those appear to be long-term injuries, so potentially all 3 of them are back in the next couple of weeks. And coming in for those 3 were Zane Dersma, Jaden Stevenson and Will Phil. And then the substitute from those was Dersma, so Liam Shields playing a full game this week. And there was a couple of positional changes as a result of that. Slevo and Tommy Powell moved back into half-back, so they were replacing McKercher and Fisher. It meant that we didn't have to throw Sheezel behind the ball because we had those 2 ball users down there. And as a result of Powell moving out of the forward line, out of the midfield rather, we saw Will Phil come into the middle. And then, as I said, Dersman was the sub, so he came on during the third quarter, I believe, for Robert Hansen Jr. And actually had a great impact when he came on, kicked 2 goals. So that was fantastic. I did love that we're kind of making Dersma earn it. He's had some good form in the VFL, but he hasn't absolutely blitzed it. So, with Eddie Ford's injury came an opportunity, but we didn't just slot him straight back in. He's been a substitute, and you would think his performance this week would be enough to potentially get him a full game next week. Who knows what happens if Eddie Ford is fit and comes back, but Dersma certainly didn't do his chances any damage. Will Phil was okay when he came in. We'll talk more about the other aspects of the game as we go on. But it was interesting to see a couple of changes, a bit of experimentation with both Powell and Stevenson behind the ball. Lots to talk about from how that went during the game. And I don't really have any complaints about those ins. I think we need to get a look at Wilfield. We're trying something different with Stevenson, and we had to replace Eddie Ford. So all fair enough, and plenty to look at in terms of what that might look like next week. In terms of the match result, if you missed it, it was North Melbourne 10-6-66, defeated by 40 points by the Cats, 16-10-106. Yeah, pretty emphatic in the end. The Cats won every quarter. And, like I said, it was late in that third quarter. It looked like we'd got ourselves back within a chance. But when it got out to essentially 5 goals at three-quarter time out of nowhere, it was game over by that point. And really, we didn't look like it in the last quarter. We didn't give up by any means, but there was at no point during that last quarter where you really thought we were going to mount a comeback. The game was done, unfortunately, with those 3 late goals. So, not ashamed. 40 points is kind of on that borderline of if it was a couple more goals, you'd call it a thrashing. If we're a couple goals close, you'd call it a close game. It's just a really comfortable win by the Cats in the end, and that is to be expected. They're obviously competing for a top 4 spot, and eventually you would have to say the better team won out. But it was pleasing that we did make life difficult for them right up until three-quarter time. In terms of the story of the game, I think there was a couple of things that I could have picked out. But I think for me, our kicking inside 50 was really awful, unfortunately, down in Tassie. It's been an issue all year. It's been an issue for several years. It's not a new problem. I'm sure no one's listening to this and going, oh, that's unusual. It was just a real challenge for us to give our forwards first use when it was going inside 50. At times we'd get momentum and ascendancy and just ruin it with our awful service for the forwards. To be honest, it's a miracle that Larkey was able to kick his 3 goals. His service was awful, and when he kicked his third late, he made a little burger symbol because there was a deal at the game if you're at the game and Larkey kicked 3 goals and there was a free cheeseburger on offer. So I guess he got the job done for the fans of the game. But in terms of the ball coming inside 50, it was really tough going. The best we looked was when we were able to just handball it and run it forward. And we had a couple of those opportunities in the first quarter that looked fantastic. It looked like we were really on, and we'd found a way to kind of break down Geelong's strategy. It meant that we were avoiding kicking it into the Tom Stewart area, who was often waiting down the line. And boy, didn't the commentary let us know that Tom Stewart was down the line. Don't get me wrong, he had influence, and he had a good game, but the commentators just talked about him as though he was the second coming of Christ. It was truly something else, and I guess that is a bit of the old. You've got to find something to talk about when North Melbourne's playing, because often there can be some stretches where there's not a lot to talk about. I think we were able to avoid him down the line, we looked really good. But as soon as we were actually having to kick it inside 50 with a bit of pressure on us, it fell apart. And it was the usual suspects. Wardlaw, look, I love Georgie Wardlaw, and I think he's going to be a fantastic player. I just do not want him kicking it inside 50 at all at the moment. He should be on a permanent ban, because some of his kicks the last couple of weeks going inside have been horrific and just such letdowns from the build up to them. We know that LDU is problematic going inside 50 as well. He didn't have a great kicking game, which again is not unusual for him. So I think this is my issue, and I hope this is something that we can address moving forward, sort of in that medium term. We've got ball winners, we can win clearances, but the concern is more what happens after that, and how we kick it inside 50 and giving players like Larkey and Curtis and Xerri opportunities to score, because so often our kicks inside 50 are not to their advantage. And there seems to be a bit of a breakdown between the forwards and the mids in terms of either level of skill or just communication in terms of knowing what the other is doing. There's a perfect example. I think it may have been the third quarter, could have been the second, where Robert Hansen Jr. got the ball on the wing, had a little bit of run, had time and space, just had to punt it over the back for Nick Larkey, and unfortunately dropped it short. And that's the story of the game in terms of our lack of capacity to hit a target inside 50. Our efficiency going inside was 39% versus Geelong's 48%. And that's, below our horrible season average of 41, but, pretty much on track with what we've done for the rest of the year. Unfortunately, we just were completely unable to give our forwards an opportunity to go inside. And, it's a really deflating feeling when you win the ball at stoppage, move it forward, and then kick it to a Geelong player who will immediately intercept mark and go the other way. It was, a lot of Geelong intercepting, and sure, there was some Tom Stewart in that, but he was not the only one doing it. It was a challenging game to watch from that perspective, and I think that'd be on my top 3 things to address in the off season. What do we look like when we're going inside 50? How are we ensuring that our forwards know what to do and what their running patterns look like, so that they're creating space, and how do our mids know where to kick it if they're in a hurry versus where to kick it if they've got some time to think about it, and executing those kicks, because the only person that I absolutely trust kicking it inside 50 is Harry Sheezel, to be honest. There are some that kind of wax and wane. Will Phil had some moments in the game, but also some turnovers too. And unfortunately, Sheezel can't kick it to himself inside 50, so we are going to have to find some other options going inside and figure out what we do there. But yeah, I think that to me was the big difference in the first 3 quarters, and then after that, that late third quarter rush, that was all she wrote. I think had we been able to be a little bit more efficient going inside 50 and taking a few more of our opportunities, it's a much closer game in that third quarter, and it possibly is a different story. Maybe we end up going down by 10 or 15 points as opposed to the 40 that we did go down by. 5 stars, looking at the North Podium, we are right at the business end of the year now, only 4 games to go, and Harry Sheezel is making it very hard to catch him. It was just impossible to go past him for the 4 votes in this one. Just let me take a big breath before I read out his stat line here. 36 disposals, 1 goal, 3 marks, 5 tackles, 9 clearances, which was the most in the game, 2 goal assists, 4 inside 50s, 14 score involvements out of 16 scores total, 25 contested possessions, and went at 81% disposal efficiency. Just not enough descriptive words to help paint a picture for what kind of season and what kind of game he's had. Just to go over a couple of those stats there, 25 contested possession is the most contested possessions for a teenager ever, or at least in the time that we've been able to measure that statistic and record it. So a huge game, a huge inside game from him. Like I mentioned, he was involved in 14 out of 16 of our scores, which it would have to be close to some kind of record in terms of percentage of involvements in scores. He was just, immense. Everything that he did, or every good thing that we did, he was somehow involved in. Super composed around the contests, such a good first touch, and you kind of can get accustomed to just how good he is, but if you're watching him every week, I think every time an opposition fan talks to me about North Melbourne, it's generally about Harry Sheezel, because they've watched him once or twice and have been blown away by his skill level, whereas I think we're nearly getting a little bit used to it, which is such a luxury. I cannot say a bad word about the game that he played. He was fantastic. 3 votes, Tristan Xerri, 25 disposals, 5 marks, 2 of them contested, 8 tackles, 54 hit-outs, 15 of those to advantage, 3 clearances, a goal assist, 8 score involvements. Just an absolute monster at the ruck contests around the ground. Got involved with handball chains at times as well with some composure, so it wasn't just a tap ruckman or a tackler. A big part of our clearance work when it was going well. He had I would say, a fantastic game. Obviously dominated the hit-outs, and just in general was fantastic at following up his own work. We know he loves tackling. We know he loves the clearance. But I was actually really impressed by the way that he was able to distribute the ball by hand. When he did have a bit of time, he did take the ball out of the ruck several times, and I thought was better at doing that than he has been in the past. Actually gave himself some time to think about it and didn't get caught with the ball, trying to do too much, which he's sometimes been guilty of when he takes it out of the ruck. Like I mentioned, a couple of contested marks around the ground, which we know is an area of his game that we'd like him to improve. So, yeah, to be honest, I thought was clearly our second best rather. He and Sheezel, I think, were far and away our best on the ground. And similarly, I just can't say enough great things about Xerri. He's such a strong body. I don't think really made too many clangers. There was one quick kick that he had coming out of defence that was turned over, but I just don't know that he should have been handballed the ball at that time, to be honest. He could have made a better decision by foot. That's probably the only one that I think he'd really want back. Besides that, he had a fantastic game and deserves the 3 votes. Then it got a little bit trickier to find the 2 and the 1 and to order the 2 and the 1. I've given 2 to Jackson Archer, which is a fantastic effort from him to be grabbing votes in another game this year. I think this might be his 3rd or 4th game that he's snagged some votes. 12 disposals, 5 marks, 8 tackles, 7 intercepts, 6 spoils, and all of his disposals were effective, 100% disposal effectiveness. And the thing that impressed me the most about Jackson was his desperation. We know that's one of his traits. One of the hallmarks of his game is that he's just, as the commentators were saying several times, just such an honest player, which I think is their way of saying he doesn't have a lot of skill, but he gives it a crack. And, there's definitely truth to that, but I think he's developing some nuance and some ability in terms of the way that he disposes of the ball. I think the angles that he's approaching contests at are really improving, and we know that he hits those contests at 100% pace. He really gives it a red-hot crack. Several times his desperation to make a contest, save goals, he ran back with the flight several times and made a contest where it looked like we were going to be outmarked inside defensive 50. He was battling away against Brian Myers and Tyson Stengle, and whilst Stengle did get off the chain in the end and kick 3 goals, I thought Archer was floating between a few, like I said, and just the way that his impact, particularly when the ball was coming in aerially, was really, really, really important. I think he probably saved just 3 or 4 goals just from making contests in the defence and in a back line that, at times held up okay, but certainly had some shaky moments, which we'll talk about. Whereas I don't really think Archer had too many shaky moments. Wasn't perfect by any stretch, but absolutely gave it a crack. And deserving of the 2 votes. I thought he was our best defender. And then 1 vote, Luke Davies-Uniacke. He had 31 disposals, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 6 clearances, 4 inside 50s. So had plenty of the ball, but a lot of that was handball, which is a bit of a new development for him. He wasn't exactly stacking the stats sheet with inside 50s and clearances like he normally does. A little bit lower than maybe normal, but I thought that his work around clearances was really important, particularly in the first half. He had a really, really fast start, was racking it up. He was a little dodgy with his disposal at times, mostly by foot. I thought his hand passing was great, and like I said, was often the 3rd or 4th handball in the chain. So whilst he only had 6 clearances, which is a lowish number for him, he was in that 2nd or 3rd phase and set up several of the chains early on in the game where we were able to run through the middle of the ground. Like always, great footwork, was able to be quite evasive and didn't get caught holding the ball, again, like he is sometimes. But his second half was a little bit more quiet, didn't have as much influence. And I think what stopped him from being higher in the votes was his kicking efficiency earlier on in the game. He had some challenges kicking by foot, faded a little bit, definitely was our 4th or 3rd best. I don't think there was much disputing that from my perspective. So just recapping that, Harry Sheezel 4, Tristan Xerri 3, Jackson Archer 2, and LDU 1 vote. In terms of unlucky to miss out, to be honest, not a lot. Paul Curtis was solid. I'll talk about him later. Tommy Powell off halfback in his first game, really as a distributor back there, had 34 touches, so was busy, but I don't think did enough for me to warrant getting in the votes. And Larky similarly, had 3 goals from the little opportunities that he had, so he was probably my 5th best. Not a lot of service, not a lot of ball aside from his 3 goals, but A lot of that's not really his fault. So Powell, Larkey and Curtis were probably next in line. And then in terms of the best opposition player, I'm actually going to give it to Tyson Stengle, just because of when he kicked those goals, it really mattered and it turned the game. He really created those half chances, made the most of them. He had 11 disposals, 3 goals, 5 tackles, and a goal assist. And kicked 2 of those 3 goals late in the third quarter that really put us out of the game. He'd also kicked one earlier on, which was a great goal as well. He just was super, super damaging. The other that was obviously in contention was Tommy Stewart, who had 32 disposals, 9 marks, 530-odd metres gained. Was super influential, but probably, to be honest, I just got annoyed by how much the commentators were talking about him, because they were making out as though he was having the best game of his life, where I think in reality he was doing what he's been doing for most of the year. I do wonder if North Melbourne could have potentially adjusted to what he was doing a little better and a little earlier, but it seemed as though we were pretty happy to, I guess, let him get away with it and kind of live with the +1 that we were getting at stoppage. You could certainly argue that was a poor choice, but yeah, like I said, I don't think that he was the deciding factor in the game. He certainly was in Geelong's best. Tyson Stengle, for me, was the one that took the game away from us with those goals that he kicked in the third quarter. So I'm giving him best on. Don't know that he'll be getting best on in the coaches' votes, but he certainly was super influential. In terms of what the North podium is looking like, it is looking like it's Sheezel's to lose now. He sits atop the podium on 38 votes for the year. LDU and Xerri have drawn level on 30 votes apiece, so they're both sitting in that second spot, silver medal position, and then that means that Cam Xerri temporarily, you would think, moves on to the third place on 11 votes. It is a long way back to Cam Xerri down in fourth or equal or third, depending on how you look at it. Powell, Comben 10, Wardlaw, McKercher on 9, so it's a long way back. But yeah, Sheezel sits 2 perfect games clear, and there's a chance that he could potentially seal it next week if he's able to get another 4 votes. And LDU and Xerri miss out. We shall see, but yeah, I mean, those 3 have definitely been our best all year. It's hard to go past them. Before we jump into the positives and negatives, just a quick shout out, please. If you can, give the podcast a review on Apple or Spotify. Follow me, subscribe, and you can find me on social media at NorthPod Show on all of the social media platforms. If you would like another way to support the show, you could also buy me a coffee. I'll probably be buying a Coke with those funds, but you can find all the information for that in the show notes or at buymeacoffee.com/NorthPodShow. Ultimately, I just appreciate anyone who listens. We're getting towards the end of the season, so a big thank you to those that have been with me all season or potentially for the last 2 seasons. I really appreciate the support. So the negatives. We are not short of negatives for this game. I've already talked about our horrific disposal going inside 50, so I'm going to skip past that, so to speak, and just talk about our skill errors in general. This is something that has been the case most weeks, and it's nothing new, but it just has to keep getting mentioned, because I think eventually we need to get to a point where these are anomalies as opposed to the norm. We saw so many of them in this game. I'm going to touch on some of the major ones. The first one came in the first quarter, and Aiden Corr and Dylan Stephens combined for one of the worst 5 or 10 seconds of play on the goal line I've ever seen. There was a loose ball near the goal line or near the points line. Dylan Stephens gathered it and then tried to hand pass it across to Aiden Corr, nearly missed the ball altogether with his fist. It was almost a throw, to be honest, but the ball then dribbled along towards Aiden Corr. He picked it up and then essentially was just waiting for the contact to come from Ollie Dempsey to take him across the points line for a rush behind. Dempsey then just essentially slapped the ball out of Corr's hands. It bounced straight back to him and he snapped a goal. And it's appeared to happen in slow motion. It all did happen very quickly. But Corr and Stephens just had to be better there. You have to understand that under that kind of pressure, that they were under pressure, they could have rushed it. Aiden Corr definitely could have just stepped over We were under pressure. We were in the goal square essentially, or right next to the goal square. The fact that we did not rush that through and allowed Dempsey to kick that goal really hurt our first quarter hard work. I think that was their first or their second goal, Geelong. Like, it was certainly early for them, and we'd got off to a good start, and that really hurt. Really put a dent in what we'd been working towards in that first quarter. Unfortunately, that was just an entree, because what was to come was just really hard to watch some of these things. Jaden Stevenson, we're trialling him back in the back line. I've got a bit of PTSD watching him back there, to be honest, just based on what we saw from him back there a couple of years ago. It's not the sort of football that excites me, but I understand that we've got to give it a go, because we've got another year of him on contract, so we've got to try to find a role that will work for him. He'd been doing a bit of that work defensively in the VFL, so I get it. With the 2 outs, it was worth a go. He's got great run. He can go for a run, and sometimes the fact that he doesn't even know what he's doing can be a positive, because at least then it's harder for the opposition to read it. But yeah, in the third quarter, he had a couple of absolute shanks coming out of defensive 50. One of them just happened to fall to a North Melbourne player, and he got away with it, but another didn't, and he conceded a goal straight back over his head. So yeah, look, I just don't know if having him dispose of it coming out of the back line is the way to go. I love the fact that we're giving it a crack, but it really takes me back a couple of years, and those were some dark times when he was playing off half back, despite the fact that he can accumulate it. Anyone can really accumulate if they're in that distributing role. If they're taking kick-outs, it's not hard to accumulate. It's whether or not you're actually able to retain possession and do something positive with it, and he really wasn't able to. Holistically speaking, I wouldn't have said. Hansen Jr. was eventually subbed out, but really found out the hard way about the pace difference in the AFL. He had a chance running towards goal and should have kicked earlier and got run down from behind. So, you can mark that down as another one that was problematic for us. I thought Griffin Logue was still a little shaky at times. Dropped some marks that I think that he'll take, in the coming weeks once he's found his feet at AFL level. He did take one good intercept contested mark, but it was a little shaky in uncontested situations. And then to end the game, we had Bryn Teakle and Dylan Stevens again involved on the goal line, spoiling each other, going for a mark essentially on the defensive goal line. It dropped straight to Sean Manor, and he kicked a late goal. And you just can't make it up. It was one of those ones where you go, we've bookended the game here with 2 absolute shockers on the goal line, and it's the sort of ones that you'd laugh about if you're 5 goals up and you go on to win the game. But it is just so deflating for the players and for the fans to have those kinds of absolute clangers happening at either end of the game. So I've said it all year. These are the sorts of things that we've got to really stamp out of our game, and they're the sorts of things that are going to give us a 3 or 4 goal advantage when we stop making these big mistakes and we all of a sudden we're in games. Some super deflating mistakes. The second negative for me, or the next thing to talk about, I just don't think we were able to adjust to the way that Geelong set up after the first quarter. We played some really good corridor football in the first quarter, and then Geelong kind of set up differently around stoppage and didn't allow us to get out the front with handballs and sort of run and carry the ball. We then went straight back to kicking it long to contests, and that really played into Geelong's and Tommy Stewart's hands. Because Stewart was playing mid, it generally meant that we had a +1 around the footy whenever the ball was sort of, either defensive 50 or around the wing. So I guess we were gambling on the fact that we were going to take advantage of that and make use of the +1 at the stoppage. But that only works if you're able to run and carry the ball, because if you're kicking it long, we're kicking to an outnumber. And there were just so many times where that happened and Geelong intercepted and sent it back the other way. So I really think we needed to adjust better to what was happening there. And that's probably a coaching box decision more than anything else, because I don't know how many times we've come out after halftime and given up a lead, or moreover, we've been in the game and then just gifted the opposition some opportunities. And I think, in some ways we were able to stop that. We were able to stem the flow early on in the third quarter, but to have the third quarter end the way that it did was so deflating, and just it's those lapses in concentration, lapses in adjusting to what the opposition's giving us that costs us so often. So that was disappointing. The other major thing, I guess, to talk about is that we just had it's another one of those games where there were too many passengers, too many players that we didn't get enough out of. Bryn Teakle had a really quiet game, was barely sighted, kicked a goal late as a result of a Joe the Goose over the top. So he was super fortunate that he received the handball in the goal square and kicked the goal, but really didn't offer too much else beyond that. And that's okay. It's a hard role being that lead up forward, back up ruck, but he did have shades of Cal Coleman-Jones in that he really struggled to get involved in the game. I mentioned Hanson Jr. before. He didn't struggle massively, but he did get subbed off. So there was obviously the view in the coach's box that he was one of our worst performers, and a nice straight swap for Dersman as well. It kind of worked on both those levels. There was a dangerous moment where Aiden Core appeared to go down injured in the second quarter, and I wondered if we're going to regret having Dersmer as the sub, because it certainly wouldn't have been a like for like, but he went down for some treatment and did come back out. Haven't heard yet whether or not that's an injury that's going to keep him out for a couple of weeks or not, and they just were able to get him through, but he certainly did look a little bit proppy for the rest of the game, Aiden Core, so that's one to watch. We do need some more from Chom. I'm going to talk about him in a minute in the positives, but like last week, he did find it hard to consistently make an impact on the game. It looked as though he might have been a little bit sore at the end and spent a bit of extra time on the bench in the last quarter, but I need him to get himself a bit more involved in the game, similar to Bryn Teakle. I thought Bailey Scott was a lot less influential than last week. Still had around 18 touches, but did not have the impact that he was able to last week, and that running power on the wing. Liam Shields had no impact. I think it's definitely fair to say that given he's one of our uncontracted players, I'd be really surprised to see him get a contract for next year. But, he's been... Last year, I thought he was great. It's just been this year that he's really, I thought, struggled with the pace of the game. And, which is, that it is what it is. Griffin Logue, I mentioned, he's still building and getting his game going. Went at 43 disposal effectiveness, so definitely some work to do with his disposal. But I thought too many players that we needed to carry today rather than they were carrying us. And I think that's a familiar story for a lot of North Melbourne fans this year. The bottom third players are the ones that are often holding us back in those 50-50 games, because we got plenty out of Sheezel, we got plenty out of Xerri. Larkey did his job. Like, there were those top tier players that I thought did the best they could. But there's too many around the fringes that just, were costing us. Like Dylan Stevens was involved in both of those horrific balls ups on the goal line that cost us 2 goals. He's the sort of player that needs to lift, and he's going to be around for a little while. We've given him a fair contract, so we've got to find a way to make him work. Otherwise, we're going to be ruining giving him such a long contract, unfortunately. Anyway, let's move on to the positives, because there were some positives to come out of the game. I mentioned it before. Charlie Common's contested marking up forward continues to be a pro. He took a really good specky early on, and then another good contested mark later on in the game. So I love the fact that he's able to run at the ball and take a mark, because that's, it's not a strength of Larky's to take a contested mark. We don't have a forward, or we haven't had a forward that's been able to take a great contested clunk. So if Charlie Comben can do more of that over the next month, I think that'd be fantastic, and potentially, help make that decision around where he might play in the medium term. He does need to find more of the footy. I talked about that, but if he's clunky him like that, I think he's a great chance of being that centre half forward that we need to pair with Larky for the medium term. It's great to see him progressing and his confidence in his body. I hope that he was just a little bit sore. It looked like he hurt his thumb in the second half, I think that was. So hopefully it's just a little sore, a bit of a bruise. Again, I guess like Aiden Core, we'll have to wait and see what comes out in the next couple of days. I thought another positive was that we were able to fight back in the game, sort of midway through that third quarter. We showed that we've developed some maturity and some gumption over the course of the year. This was a game where I think we would have got had the game taken away from us much earlier, possibly in the second or the third quarter earlier in the year. But we were able to steady, and like I said, we really built some momentum in that third quarter. It looked like we were going to make a push to potentially take the lead even before that collapse happened at the end of the quarter. I thought Xerri and Sheezel really led that through the middle of the ground and tried to create. Georgie Wardlaw's attack on the footy, can never be questioned. I thought his physicality around the contest was fantastic. He certainly needs to work on his kicking, and he overran it at times and fumbled it a bit, but you couldn't fault his energy in the way that he was trying to attack the contests. I think the next step for us is to not allow these lapses like that one at the end of the third quarter to ruin all the good work that we've done to that point, because it just must be so deflating for the players that have helped chip away at that lead, got it back to 10 points, to then see it just flush down the toilet in the last 2 minutes of the quarter. It would have been really hard. I've got no doubt that Clarko would have either been really disappointed and really used that as a teaching moment, or absolutely gone off. And I think it's probably more likely it's the latter. The teaching is probably coming during the week, but he would have just been furious watching the way that third quarter went. Given the fantastic job that we'd done earlier on in the third quarter with, like I said, Sheezel and Xerri and Curtis and Larkey, leading the way and getting us back into the game. So I thought it was positive that we actually were able to, show a bit of maturity and show a bit of fight and get ourselves back into the game in the third quarter. And then the final other positive to mention, this is a bit more lighthearted. I didn't really give Curtis much of a mention aside from in the mentions in the North Podium. I thought that he did have a great impact with the possessions that he had. Probably an underrated performance. He had a lot of handballs, which often go unnoticed, but some of those were super important. We just watched it in the first quarter with who I was watching it with. We remarked that he wasn't looking as oily as he normally does. He was not oily Paul. He wasn't himself, and wasn't really having an impact in the first quarter. Looked as though at the start of the second quarter or during quarter time, someone got onto him and said, "Mate, you've forgotten your oil." They gave his arms a nice oil up, and he kicked a goal almost immediately in that second quarter. So I think the message there is keep Oily Paul oily. He needs to have those arms nice and shiny, because he had a fantastic impact early in that second quarter. He did get involved in some other crucial scoring chains, had a couple of really important handballs, and I thought was involved in some of our best pressure work inside 50 as well. He had 4 tackles inside 50, so that is an area of the game that I think he's really improved in. He's not just a goal-kicking opportunistic forward. He can put that pressure on, and he's also gotten much better at crumbing this year. I think it's really developed, because naturally I think he is a good medium marking forward, but in our setup we do need him to play the role of one of those small forwards. I think he's really developed that. He does need to continue to work on the brain fades. He slapped the ball out of Jeremy Cameron's hands on the wing after Cameron had taken a mark and gave away a 50, which led to a goal. And it was just one of those split-second decisions. It's not completely stupid, because I don't think he made a conscious decision to do it. I think he was more just slightly late in trying to spoil. But it was a 50. There's no doubt about it. It's just another one of those decisions that unfortunately, where he makes a split-second decision that's not a good one, that's a little undisciplined, and results in a problem for us. So aside from that, I thought, he had a really positive game, and would love to see him continuing to build on that pressure, because he will get reward for effort in that way. He'll kick more goals, and will kick more goals if he is laying tackles inside 50, like he was against Geelong, because he was really frenetic and led the team and led the game for tackles inside 50. That, I think, is going to do it for the game review. Look, a disappointing result in the end after some really positive moments within the game, but plenty to take out of it. I think at this time of year, you're just looking for, feedback around the players that are coming out of contract, and you're looking for, development and improvement from the young players. And I do think we got both of those in this game, so plenty to take out of it. We'll look Quickly, the VFL game, it was another loss to the Cats, 51-72. So just a cheeky double loss for us there. Not a lot to talk about in terms of players that I think are likely to come in next week. Greenwood did the usual stuff, had 30 disposals, kicked a goal, 9 tackles and 11 clearances. So, a brute on the inside. We know he's too good for VFL level, but just not quite in the right age bracket for us in terms of being a mid, because we do want to get time into players like Wardlaw and Wilfil and Sheezel in the midfield. So I think it's unlikely we see Greenwood this year anymore. Finbar Maley had plenty of it. He had 24 disposals, 8 tackles and 22 hitouts. So potentially he'd be one that we might look at in the last month to just get a look at what he might look like at AFL level. Toby Pink kicked 2 goals, so, pressed his case a little bit for a recall. But yeah, I think any likely changes for this coming week would be more likely Fisher and McKercher and Ford coming back from injury as opposed to someone coming up from the twos, just based on, the performances there and the kind of players that we got to look at in there. Bergman was back there playing, Hardiman was back there playing. There's a few of those types that didn't necessarily light the world on fire. Biggie Newen the same. None of those I would say are pushing for selection at the moment. So, I think we're more likely to see a couple of changes from those injured players if they are able to return. The only other news item that I want to talk about is obviously we are coming up to the end of our season. We've now got 4 matches left, and we still have a relatively long list of out-of-contract players, and some of these are ones that some of these are players that we would definitely be trying to sign, whereas some of these are players that we'd be figuring out, do we offer them a contract? So I just thought I'd read through them to give you a sense of what list decisions are coming up. I'll definitely talk about these players in more detail in the next couple of weeks, I would say. But as I said, I'll go through them. Bailey Scott, Blake Drury, Cam Zerha, Charlie Lazaro, Cooper Harvey, Curtis Taylor, Finbar Maley, Hamish Free, Hugh Greenwood, Jackson Archer, Liam Shields, Robert Hanson Jr., Tyler Sellers, Will Phillips, and then technically Taron Thomas is still contracted for this year, in theory at least. He's obviously coming off. So from that list, we would be trying to sign Bailey Scott. We've been trying to sign Cam Zerha. They're the two that we would be definitely trying to sign. I think just looking at this list, actually, I think Jackson Archer has signed. It just hasn't been made official. I could be wrong about that. Maybe I'm remembering that wrong. But yeah, certainly Scott and Zerha we would be trying to sign. It's the others that we'd be making decisions on. Free agency, like Zerha is a free agent. He's a restricted free agent. Whereas Greenwood and Shields are unrestricted, given how old they are and the fact that they've been delisted and or retired in the past. So they are unrestricted free agency players. Everyone else is not a free agent. I guess there's just something to take note. There's certainly a big chunk of those players that won't be on the list next year. There's a chance that we'll have to reduce our list size, and you always have to get rid of some so that you can bring some through the draft. So players like Drury, Lazaro, Cooper Harvey, Curtis Taylor, Finbar Maley, Hamish Free, Greenwood, Shields, Hanson Jr., Sellers, Will Phillips, they're the ones that we're going to have to make decisions on in the coming weeks or in the coming months, so that we do have some availability on our list, so that we can either bring in some talent and or draft. So yeah, I'll probably spend a little bit more time on them in future weeks, just so we can get a sense of, I guess, what I'm thinking and what the club might be thinking. Next week we have the Richmond Tigers at Marvel Stadium. It's another Saturday afternoon 1:45 game, which I've got to say I love from a podcasting perspective. It gives me plenty of time for the rest of the weekend to get the podcast out before the week starts, but it's obviously not prime time. A big chance for a win though. Big chance for a win, and this game will go a long way to deciding who the wooden spooner is. We're both sitting on 2 wins for the year. Richmond's percentage is just slightly worse now at the moment, which has got us off the bottom. But yeah, you would think, barring some strange things, that this might decide the wooden spoon. We do play West Coast the week after. So I suppose in theory, if we were to lose this but then win against West Coast, that could make things interesting. But you would think the loser of this is in the box seat for the Wooden Spoon. And given, how long we've been on the bottom, it's must win for us. We really need to get a win here. We do not need or want to finish last. We know that last year, sure, in theory, might have been the year to get the Wooden Spoon and winning that game against the Gold Coast. Yada yada yada. We've talked about that ad nauseum. We need to be winning now. It would be super deflating if we were to lose this, given our form from the past several weeks. So I think it is important for us to win. It's our last home game at Marvel for the year. We do play another game at Marvel against the Dogs in 2 weeks after this one, but that's a Dogs home game. And then we've got another home game in Hobart. So, last home game in Melbourne for the year. So hopefully it's a relatively big crowd considering it's 18th versus 17th. But they're both Melbourne sides, so you'd hope to get a few along. And like I say, I think it's important for us to win. I don't feel confident by any stretch, but I do feel as though, in the scheme of things, it's a really important game for us to win, and hopefully we're able to do that. So, with that, I will let you get on with your day. As always, I hope you have a fantastic week. Thank you for listening. It's always a pleasure talking about North Melbourne, even though we're constantly disappointed by what they dish up for us. We'll talk soon after the Richmond game, and like I said, we're coming up to the end of the season. Can't believe we're nearly there, and just before we know it, it'll be time to start talking about the draft and the trade period. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.